Welcome to Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music. Season 1, The Beatles. This project started off as a live show created in partnership with the Berman Theater at the J Detroit, and has grown exponentially since then, including shows about other bands and other genres. Now we're doing this podcast where in each episode we're going to dive deep into the history and the legacy of most of our favorite band, and that is the Beatles, focusing on where Jews and the Jewish community contributed and collaborated to their stardom. Each episode begins with a recording from our live show telling a quick and high-level version of the story, followed by this episode, this deep dive really getting into it, as I interview some really special guests. It's no secret Jewish events today can be appropriately hard. We have some serious issues that we're grappling with as a community, and they often require a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards. The Storied live show was conceived and developed at the J in Detroit in partnership with the Berman Theater, not as the answer to this problem, but as an answer to this problem. We are focused on a positive narrative, Jewish joy, and reminding people about the great contributions made by the Jewish community. We're excited to see Storied grow with this podcast and many more live shows. Now, you may be here because you're a Beatles fan, or you may be here because you're looking for positive Jewish content. In either case, our intent is for all of your delight. And I think you're going to get there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see this awesome Storied shirt that I'm wearing, and it was designed and made by a sponsor of the show, Yonatees. Now, Yonatees makes awesome custom merch and some really great Jewish-themed merch, like the ones you're seeing popping up on the screen here. If you're listening on an audio feed, pop over to YouTube just to see what I'm showing you, because it's worth it, and I think you're going to like it. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to talk to you. Check out the links in the story notes, including our website, www.story.show, for more information about who we are, what we do, the other bands and genres we've covered, or how we can bring this live show to your city. If you like what we've done here, please leave us a review and maybe some stars. If you have any questions, hit us up on our socials. We'd love to hear from you. All the links, again, are in the show notes. And with that, let's get this show on the long and winding road. Hey there, welcome to episode 6 of Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music. Today is Monday, October 13th. It's about 2:15 in the afternoon. While I normally record these introductions 4 or 5 days in advance to give our editing team a moment to do it, I really waited till the last minute because I wanted to see how things were going to unfold. And today is a day for celebration in the Jewish world, in the world of Israel. Today we saw 20 hostages come home alive. It's like a weight has been lifted off many of our shoulders. To say that I'm filled with gratitude would be an understatement. It almost doesn't do it justice. We also know that in the coming days, we're going to see 28 hostages come home for burial. That's going to be hard. I think of the prophetic words, "For everything there is a season, a time for joy, a time to laugh, a time to cry." Right now is a time for joy, but we know that a time to cry is coming. Forgive me for this heavy introduction to the episode, but I wanted to frame the conversation, because if this podcast episode was recorded today, I think some of the conversation would have been a little bit different, and that's okay. This was recorded weeks ago, before there was any conversation about a ceasefire or about hostages tangibly coming home. So just keep that in mind as you hear some of this conversation. Now let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. The title of the episode is about Shea Stadium, and we're going to talk about Shea Stadium, this monumental watershed moment for the Beatles, where they played the first outdoor stadium concert that had ever been done. Without this show, we really wouldn't have the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound or Taylor Swift's Era Tour. It was really that monumental of a moment. And one of the songs that was played that night, which was a song that they played regularly from small shows at the Cavern Club to shows at the end of their career, was Twist and Shout, written by Burt Berns. Now, we're super lucky to have Brent Berns on this podcast episode. Burt Berns was an incredible man. He wrote not only Twist and Shout, he wrote Hang On Sloopy, he wrote Cry Baby, he wrote Piece of My Heart. He was pretty amazing. We're going to learn about the Brill Building. We're going to learn about this place that was the songwriter's haven. It was where the cool kids were hanging out and making songs, making music, writing the songs that bands could play. We talked about that versus AI and Spotify and how the industry has changed. And really in some incredible name dropping, but not for the purpose of name dropping, but for the purpose of having a detailed conversation about who his dad was. We talk about Neil Diamond and Van Morrison and Janis Joplin and Phil Spector. We talk about the Isley Brothers and Carole King and George Gershwin and Stevie Van Zandt and Jimmy Page. I can't wait for people to respond to the Jimmy Page conversation, because honestly, that's one of the coolest things that we've talked about in this podcast. We talked about Bob Dylan, Rob Reiner, and of course, Brian Epstein. This is a phenomenal episode. I'm really excited for you guys to hear what we're talking about today. I've got to do a little bit of soul searching and talk to my team and figure out whether we're going to re-record these episodes that have been pre-recorded and now things have changed that the hostages are home, or are we going to keep going with them as is? I don't know the answer to that yet, but we're going to work it all out. We're going to work it out, and we're going to twist, and we're going to shout. Let's do this.
Sid Burstein, a New York City promoter, born to Yiddish-speaking Orthodox parents in Harlem, had a knack for spotting talent. He first learned about the Beatles from British newspaper long before they were a household name in America. It was his booking of the Beatles at Carnegie Hall in 1964 that put Sid on the map. And in the first episode of the podcast, I'm pushing the podcast, by the way, you guys should check it out. In the first episode of the podcast, Moody Sandberg fills in a lot of details about Sid and his story and many other stories tonight. The success of that show led Bernstein to dream even bigger, and he decided to book the Beatles at Shea Stadium, the home of the New York Mets, filling a whopping 55,000 seats with screaming fans. It was a gamble, but one that paid off in spades. Now, I have a friend who was at a Mets game 2 weeks ago, and it was the 60-year anniversary, and they covered the stadium. It's not Shea Stadium. It's whatever it's called now. But I'm going to post some footage on the storied Instagram. I'm pushing that. You guys should check that out as well, to see what it looked like for the Mets to really memorialize this incredible show. No band had ever played an outdoor stadium before like this. On the day of the show, the excitement was palpable. Cousin Brucey and Ed Sullivan introduced the band to a deafening roar from the crowd. They say it was so loud the Beatles couldn't hear themselves play. Cousin Brucey told Forbes there was an energy like I've never felt, but now I say it was an energy of love. Behind the scenes, the nerves were running high and the Beatles themselves were anxious about the show. Paul looked around and said, "Is this even safe?" This Cousin Brucey, despite his own fear, said, "Paul, John, this is going to be safe. All they want to do is be in the same space as you because they love you." Cousin Brucey and Ed Sullivan walked up the stairs to introduce the band, and they could feel the energy coursing through their bodies. Sullivan, feeling the tension, repeated Paul's question to Cousin Brucey and said, "Is this even safe?" And in the moment of levity, Cousin Brucey replied, "Well, Ed, I don't know if it's going to be too safe. It might be a little dangerous." And Sullivan said, "What are we going to do?" And Cousin simply said, "Pray, Ed, pray." The Beatles' Shea Stadium concert was a watershed moment, not just for the Beatles, but for music history. It paved the way for countless outdoor stadium shows for decades to come. Without the Beatles and Sid Burstein's vision, there might never have been a Grateful Dead Wall of Sound. There might never have been a Taylor Swift Eras tour. Now, let's go back for a second to the song Twist and Shout, written by Burt Berns. From the first time we did the show to today, I learned a lot about Bert. His son, Brent, is on the podcast in this story. And I learned that he's the one who got Neil Diamond and Van Morrison started. He was a passionate Zionist who actually once turned an album release party into a fundraiser for the United Jewish Appeal. Burt Berns was a pretty special man, and I'm excited for you guys to hear his story.
Hey, before we get to this interview, I want to take a moment and thank our new sponsor, Tequila Kosher Spirits. And they make the kosher tequila that I am seeing popping up around Detroit. And if you know me personally, or if you follow my social media, you'll know that I'm sober and I don't drink. But when I go to different Jewish events and I hear this topic come up, everybody has really great things to say about it. So I'm excited that Tequila reached out and said that they wanted to sponsor the podcast. Every special Chaim deserves a special spirit, but finding high quality kosher spirits is near impossible. until now. So we're introducing Tequila Kosher Tequila, the world's first Jewish-inspired tequila, celebrating culture, community, and tradition. Tequila is 100% kosher and 100% additive-free. Check it out at buy.tequilaspirits.com for a smooth tequila blanco and bold tequila reposado. Tequila, l'chaim like you mean it. The link is in the show notes. Now let's hear this interview. Welcome, everybody, to Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music, where we focus on the Jewish contribution and collaboration to some of your favorite bands and artists and genres. In this season, we're talking about the Beatles, and today we're very lucky to have Brent Berns, who's the son of Burt Berns, to be here and talk. Welcome, Bert. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Benji. Everybody makes that mistake, and I'm always sort of like flattered when somebody does. So, yeah, it's Bert, Brett. It's I don't know, I was
I'm
almost
sure
a brat,
you've been called worse.
There you go.
Right.
I have been called worse. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm such a privilege to be part of this project.
Absolutely. I'm really grateful that you're here and, seeing you on video. I think anybody who's watching this on YouTube will see we've got two shaved head, bearded Jewish guys with glasses wearing black shirts. I mean, we're essentially identical twin brothers, and
That's right.
It's a wonderful thing. I'm going to start off by sharing something with you about my family. So similar to you, I've got a father who is a musician. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Diaspora Yeshiva Band. It's a big music story in the modern Orthodox world. The Diaspora Yeshiva Band started off with my father and the guitar player, Avram Rosenblum. They were friends, and they were touring Israel in the early 70s, just playing duo acoustic shows. And they wrote a bunch of music. My dad wrote a bunch of songs, and then Avram ended up taking those songs and turning it into the Diaspora Yeshiva Band. And one of the very cool experiences is being with my daughter at a synagogue and hearing them sing those songs, and her recognizing that her grandfather's music is being sung in a synagogue, in a random place. And we always really enjoyed that. And so I think your story is a multiple of that by millions. And it's just a very cool thing. So let's start off. This episode is about the Shea Stadium story. And in the Shea Stadium story, you've got Sid Bernstein, Cousin Brucey, and Ed Sullivan sort of putting together this first time you have an outdoor concert in a stadium, 55,000 people. This didn't exist. And they were afraid, like they didn't know how it was going to go. And somehow it went well. And there's this iconic picture and this iconic video of fans screaming so loud that the band was having trouble hearing themselves. A lot of that video and part of that story is Twist and Shout, which was written by your dad, Burt Berns. How does it feel to just be a sort of a spoke in the wheel of this comet-like burst of creativity that is the Beatles? And can you talk about that? It's a big question. Lots of answers.
Yes, right. Just being the son of Burt Berns all my life has been like a great blessing, and also, sort of like difficult to live in the shadow of a great man like that as well, in a way. Like, I only picked up the guitar late in life, thinking, there was no way I was ever gonna be able to sort of walk in the shoes of this great songwriter and record producer. But growing up without he died when I was a baby. I was only 2.5 years old when he died. He had 3 kids in 3 years, as he was starting a record label, Bang Records, signing Neil Diamond and Van Morrison. And, there was nothing that he didn't do in music. And then he died at the age of 38 from this rheumatic heart condition that he knew was going to take his life anyways. And so he lived this extraordinary life that, there was nothing that he didn't do in music, so to speak. And I grew up not really knowing that much about him, because he had really disappeared, like, from the history books. He was never recognized in any Hall of Fame. He was blackballed and whitewashed from rock and roll history because his story was such a fascinating story that involved the Genovese mob and every other kind of thing. But growing up, the one thing I did know was that my dad wrote a Beatles song. And Twist and Shout, of course, is the greatest song that he wrote. I mean, he wrote Piece of My Heart, the Janis Joplin classic, and Hang On Sloopy, and He produced songs like Brown Eyed Girl and Under the Boardwalk, but Twist and Shout is the greatest song. I mean, it's like, what did Andrew Loog Oldham, the great Rolling Stones founder, he said, it's like a song that was impossible for somebody to write because it was just above kind of. And, there's not a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah that I don't go to where I hear Twist and Shout. And every time I hear the song, it's like my father is kind of like, shining down from the heavens. And so yeah, that's the one song, I mean, that everybody knows, and yeah, it's an amazing feeling, to feel like you said a little tiny spoke, in this story. But yeah, that is his greatest triumph. And if he had done nothing else but write Twist and Shout, which is one of the great Beatles songs, and when you look at like the greatest hits of the Beatles, people put that in there, even though he didn't write it, because it was just such an important song in their repertoire and in their history. So yeah, if it was nothing else but that, I would just be like beaming with pride.
That's pretty awesome. It's very rare that you hear on podcasts that people say, pause for a second and go listen to this other podcast. But I listened to your interview on the Avram Rosenzweig show. And by the way, we're not related. It's just a coincidence. But the in-depth questions that he asked about your dad and your relationship and the meaning of Hang On Sloopy and just the Genovese family and just sort of like the insanity that wrapped around your dad's story. I think that's a really great podcast. It's a really great interview, and I think you guys did a great job. And so those are not the questions that I'm going to ask today. And so if people really want to get a good look at your dad from that perspective, I think that's a great interview and a great resource. And I hope you tell people to listen to that, because you guys did a great job there.
Thank you.
In the first episode, in the first story in this series, I talk about the cover songs that the Beatles played in their early years, because they were a young band and they were playing at the Cavern. I mean, they were playing these great halls and these great shows. They didn't have that much material. It's not like Fish where you can play 13 nights in a row and never repeat a song, right? They didn't have enough material, and so they were playing covers, and many of those covers were written by Jews, obviously Twist and Shout being one of them, but it's really the one that lasted. They continued to play that throughout the career. And in the documentary that you made, Paul McCartney talks about how this was their big show stopper. Like this was a big part of their repertoire. Your dad was part of the Brill Building. I'm sure you're familiar with that term, like Brill Building era. And for those who are not familiar, it's a building where the record company basically had guys like Burt Berns and other songwriters, Carole King, and people kind of hold up songwriting and producing and putting together music. I live in a world where, I'm a music fan who loves the authenticity, and I love the sort of the raw musicianship, and I'm watching AI songs be the number one, streamed music on Spotify. And I'm like, what kind of world are we living in, right? How does that work? Why is auto-tune a thing? And I'm going to sound like a grumpy old man. Kids can just make music on their iPads, there's this difference, insanity in today's modern music. But when you look back, the Brill Building and that era of music, that was the modern version of music coming out then, right? It wasn't necessarily songwriters who were performing. It was people who were writing songs for performers. That was a long-winded way of getting to, with all the Jews who were involved in that, was there a Jewish aspect in the time? Were they thinking about that stuff? Or, did your dad see himself as part of a Jewish movement in this songwriting and in this music business, or was that not a factor?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think that being Jewish necessarily itself was a thing that these guys were just writing songs, and they didn't, know if anybody would be listening to them in a year from now, or in 60, 70 years later. Like, I think they were just outer borough Jewish kids who came together in this moment in time. The Brill Building, 1650 Broadway, where my dad had his entire career, was just across the street from the Brill Building, but it was the same atmosphere where just songwriters in cubicles were just, making music, writing songs together. Twist and Shout is an amazing story that I learned from somebody who was there, where my dad kind of had this idea for the song, and two other friends of his, songwriters named Ray Passman and Phil Medley, who actually is the co-writer of Twist and Shout, and an African-American songwriter who was just in that moment. And my dad was like, hey, why don't you guys go get the donuts and the coffee? Well, Ray Passman went and got the donuts and the coffee. When he came back, my father had already written the song Twist and Shout with Phil. So, it was a kind of place where they were just, hey, you go get the coffee, you go do this, you sit down, what do you got? Come listen to this idea that I had. And it happened to be that most of these guys, or a lot of them, were Jews from Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens, and they just kind of came together in this moment in time that really was like a window that opened sometime in the late 50s, early 60s, and closed like right when my dad died. I mean, it wasn't because he died that this ended, but it really was the end of an era where songwriters or bands like the Beatles started writing their own songs. And one of the things that my father famously said was, the guys like this, they're going to be the end of songwriters like me, when he saw, groups like the Beatles and the Stones writing their own music. So yeah, it was a moment in time where it was very Jewish in nature. I've asked myself, like, what was it about the Jewish experience that led to that? And of course, it goes back to Irving Berlin and the Gershwins and all these Jewish immigrants that made American Songbook. I think that it was just that America was a place where Jews could thrive and where they could, be the greatest songwriters in the world, where that really wasn't the case beforehand. And so that, I think, is the reason, for it. I mean, my father loved being Jewish, and he wore his Jewish heart on his sleeve. He was a Zionist that wanted to fight in the 6-Day War, which was the year that he died, and so his Zionism transferred to me as well as a young man, and I, in a way to make my father proud, I made Aliyah to Israel and joined the Israeli army and was a paratrooper in the Israeli army. And one of the main motivations for doing it was to sort of do something that my father wanted to do and to please him in a way. So his Jewish identity, he loved it. He was, he saw the Holocaust. He taught my mother, what that meant. He used to say never again. That was a mantra of his. And, when he released Brown Eyed Girl with Van Morrison on the Circle Line cruise, and they had this big party, and Van was playing Brown Eyed Girl, and my dad's mob buddies went around and made everybody at the party empty their wallets into a bucket that said United Jewish Appeal War Relief for Israel. So it was that kind of a world, where, back then, I think all the Jews were Zionists, and they loved Israel, and they wanted to help in any way that they could. And my dad was certainly one of those guys.
I'm glad you brought that story up about the United Jewish Appeal, because I was going to bring it up and ask you to tell us the circumstances, and that's pretty wild.
Yeah, he he just wanted to help. He wanted to be there. He wanted to do whatever he could, and what he could do, because he had the bad heart, and he was running a record label and everything else, but he could try to rally support, and he did do that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Let's talk about your experience as a IDF soldier and living in Israel and, returning home. Can you talk about what made you go? How did you go? What did you do in the Army? How was it to be an English speaker in the Army? Today there's lots of English speakers in the Army, but back then it wasn't quite as common.
Yeah. I graduated college at the University of Virginia and made Aliyah the next day, and showed up at Kibbutz Rosh Nikra up on the Lebanon border, right on the Mediterranean, a beautiful, beautiful spot. And there was an immigrant unit at the time in the Nachal Brigade, which is a storied unit that has, that's been around since the beginning. And I went into this immigrant platoon. We all learned Hebrew together in an old pond in the Army before basic training. And some of the most meaningful friendships of my life developed from that moment on. But right in the middle of basic training, the first Palestinian uprising, the Intifada, that they called it, broke out in the Gaza Strip. And they sent my platoon into the Jabalia refugee camp, which has become a famous place. Doesn't exist anymore. I think it's been completely destroyed. But and that was the beginning of quite an extraordinary army experience, because I was in basically every theater of operations, and I ended up going to the paratroopers brigade after a year in the army. So back then the Nahal was a sort of transition to the paratroopers. It's a long story, but I got the red beret, and that was kind of a childhood dream. Spent 3 months in Gaza, in the central refugee camps of Barej and Nuseirat, some of the places that are actually not as well known, because these are the camps that have not been attacked fully by the IDF yet. They're about to be. That's where the hostages are. And so these were very, this was when Hamas was born. I learned a lot about the Palestinians and Hamas, up close and personal. It was a fascinating experience. And then we also spent time in Lebanon. So I fought against the Hezbollah. I fought the Hamas, the Hezbollah, all of them. And I loved every second of it, actually. I mean, it was just the most extraordinary experience. I tell any, young Jewish man or woman that they couldn't have a more meaningful experience in their life than to go join the IDF. Now maybe is a difficult time to send English speakers and people who don't, it's dangerous, to say the least. But the most meaningful experience I ever had, and still informs, sort of everything that I do. If ever I just need to draw on a wellspring of courage, and, I look at either my father's great example or my own experience in the Israeli army. But I only regret not having been able to do reserve duty over the decades, because I moved back to the United States. Right after my service, my father's copyrights reverted back to the family, which was something that I did not know was going to happen. But from that moment on, my sister and I basically became music publishers, and we became caretakers of the copyrights in the catalog. And our goal from that point forward was to champion our dad, because he had really fallen through the cracks of history, and he was the least known and arguably one of the greatest of the whole era. So we said, all right, we're going to tell his story in every media in order to get him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And we basically did that with the documentary, a musical that's coming to Broadway. There's a Rob Reiner film in development. There was a book by Joel Sullivan that came out that was universally acclaimed, and the documentary I made, which got 100% of Rotten Tomatoes, which is my claim to fame after Jimmy Page changing my diapers when I was a baby.
Spectacular.
True story.
Spectacular. I don't know what's more incredible, getting 100% negative or 100% positive on Rotten Tomatoes.
I don't even know if they have such a thing as 100% negative, but
right.
Yeah, this film got 100% positive on Rotten Tomatoes.
Amazing.
And, universal acclaim. I mean, this book got universal acclaim when it came out, this giant book that Joel Sullivan wrote. People fell in love with the Burt Berns story. I mean, you kind of almost can't love the guy when you learn about his extraordinary output in music and his life story, which is an inspirational example of courage and perseverance and racial integration and collaboration and all the kind of things that are in short supply in this world today.
So my dad and I were talking about 2009, and we were talking about how he was disappointed, upset, trying to get to grips with the fact that other people had recorded his music numerous times and he had never done it. And I said, well, let's get in a studio and do that. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, I know guys who own recording studios. It's not a problem. And so we went into the recording studio and we recorded a full album. We actually turned it into a live show. We brought people in to come and participate and watch and had a great time. And shortly after, he got real sick, and that was sort of like the beginning of his downward spiral. But to have that sort of piece of legacy and history and sort of, that's really something that he was really proud of at the end of his life, was having that. And I was grateful I was able to do that for him. So
that's so awesome. What a gift.
Yeah, it was really something special. So let's go back to your dad. Speaking of legacies and gifts and things like that, Stevie Van Zandt is the person who narrates the documentary. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, he's a personality in his own right, and how did he fall in love with your dad? How did you guys connect? Tell us that story.
Yes, Stevie Van Zandt. I call him the patron saint of Burt Berns because he really is the guy who's made everything my wildest dreams come true. I mean, he basically helped my father into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because he's one of the key players at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he was one of the people who knew that this was a very big historical error that Burt Berns had been overlooked. So I met him through a mutual friend named John Luongo, who's a great record man himself and worked with Stevie for years. And I was producing a musical. The Piece of My Heart is a musical that's like a kind of Jersey Boys style jukebox show that, we've been working on for many, many years and are still bringing it to Broadway. And Maureen Van Zandt, his wife, who's also a legend in her own right, came and saw an early reading and said, I'm going to bring Stevie to this. He's going to love this. And so she brought Stevie to the musical. And then also when it came time to find a narrator for the documentary, so I had made a rough cut of the film without any narration. I thought I was being clever, but my co-director, Bob Sarles, who's also the editor and a brilliant filmmaker, he said, you got most of the things you wanted in the interviews, but you didn't get everything. And so we're going to need some narration. And he very cleverly pulled lines from the book that Joel Selvin wrote about my dad to create the narration. And when it came time to decide, like, well, who are we going to get? Like, we can go to Peter Coyote. We can, there's all these sort of people that, narrate films and sort of usual suspects. I thought to myself, and Bob said, hey, you're working with Stevie on the musical, right? And, so the idea of having somebody who could narrate the film, who could bring the voice of Burt Berns into the film, because there's no video, very little audio, no video of my father in the world. I mean, it's crazy to think that a person that great, there could be no home movies or, anything that was logged on television. But it's a long story. I mean, when he died in the hotel room in the Upper West Side, and all the family photos were in the hotel room because we were moving that weekend, and they just got lost because my mother never went back to the hotel room after he died. I mean, it was real tragedies about tragedies that we lost, like the family photos and videos and stuff. So anyway, when we were making the film and it became time to find somebody to narrate it, Bob and I thought, let's get Stevie to do it. I mean, it was a little kind of counterintuitive because he hasn't done that sort of thing, I don't think. Like, he does everything, and you can imagine, in entertainment, but I don't know if he's ever narrated a documentary. And he just like the Beatles, on a one take, session, end of session recording, and knocked out Twist and Shout. Stevie, in one take, knocked out the narration for the film. And when you read the reviews, critics loved it. They just like, he's funny. He brings so much character into the film. And he brings, like, I think, the voice in a way of Burt Berns, because he sounds like my dad and he has that accent and he's a tough guy like my dad. He's actually a really sweetheart of like my dad as well. People would say, this documentary is a mob story. He'd say, no, it's a love story. And it is a love story between my mother and my dad and between, all the people that made the music with him. But yeah, I just can't say enough about Steven Van Zandt. He's a musicologist, first and foremost. Like, he knows music better than anybody I've ever met. And so he knew that Burt Berns was one of the greats, and he knew my father's body of work better than probably I did at first. And so once I met him, and he became part of the family, so almost, he's producing the musical with me to Broadway. He's going to be music director on Broadway. He narrates the film. He got my dad in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, like, I just can't say enough about Steven Van Zandt.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, you mentioned the Piece of My Heart Broadway show. It would be hard to talk about your dad without talking about Janis Joplin and Cry Baby and Piece of My Heart and some of the other, Van Morrison songs, and it's not just Twist and Shout. It's not just the Beatles. One of the things that I find, forgive me if this is insensitive, I don't mean it. I mean it in a positive way. I mean it in a sensitive way, but this song Piece of My Heart, your dad died from heart disease. And, that when I listened to that, I remember hearing my mom, my parents, listening to Janis Joplin, and, those are songs that were special in our house. Do you think there was any, I think the song came out actually after he passed away, I was reading, But do you think that there was any connection there with him writing that song, his knowing that he has this heart condition? What did that look like? The other thing that I was thinking about with that song specifically is many of both the Beatles songs and your dad's songs are very deliberate and focused and well written is a silly way of saying it, but both Twist and Shout and the songs that he wrote for Janis are these sort of guttural, emotional, screaming, sort of out there. It almost like it's so amazing and it doesn't fit the catalog, you know? Not to say that the rest of the catalog isn't good. That's what, like, I didn't mean that as a negative, but they're like outliers. Did your dad ever talk about stuff like that? Did he, was there any documentation? Did anybody ever tell you that they had those conversations?
Well, one thing that we learned, maybe the most important thing that I learned about my father, see, he said, my children will know me through my music. When he used to say that to my mother before he died, because he knew he was going to die. And sure enough, he did. And I used to think, like, what does it mean? Like, my children will know me through my music. What does Twist and Shout and Hang On Sloopy tell me about this man? It wasn't until I really became a man and took a deep dive into the catalog and into his story on this journey of discovery that I realized that his songs were autobiographical, like deeply, deeply autobiographical songs that other songwriters like him weren't as introspective and personal in that Brill Building 1650 kind of songwriter class. And when he wrote songs like Piece of My Heart and Heart Be Still, those are the last two songs that he wrote as his heart was giving way. You know, this is just sort of the ultimate proof of how he really poured his own story and his own life into his songs autobiographically, which allowed us to tell his story in his own song in the musical, which is something completely transformative of the jukebox musical genre. But so the songs were autobiographical. And when I realized that, I realized, okay, wow, I'm going to get to know my father through his music. And all the songs about crying, cry, baby, cry to me. We say this in the film. It's like his songs were very deep and emotional, and his spirit and his soul come through in his songs in ways, again, that I don't think is same for other songwriters of his era. Piece of My Heart, he actually wrote in 1967, right as before he died. He recorded it with Irma Franklin, Aretha's sister, and it was going to become a huge hit, but because he died, the song kind of died with him. And then Janis Joplin, the next year, she covered it and had her biggest hit ever with Piece of My Heart. She also covered Cry Baby, which was a Garnett Mims record. See, the thing also that I realized about my dad is that he was really a R&B soul producer and songwriter. It wasn't like Twist and Shout almost was kind of like an aberration in a way that, I mean, it was a soul record, an R&B record with the Isley Brothers, but he almost worked exclusively with Black artists and groups. And so it was like when he started working with Van Morrison and the McCoys with Hang On Sloopy and things of that nature, those were really more of an exception to the majority of his work, which was R&B and uptown New York symphonic soul music, which came before Motown and Memphis and all of it. My dad was really one of the godfathers of contemporary soul music. And so, yeah, I'm answering a bunch of different questions and maybe not answering the question that you asked, but Piece of My Heart was an autobiographical song that came from his heart as he was dying of a rheumatic heart. And the entire body of work really is very similar in that respect.
Not only did you answer the question well, but you set me up for my next question, which is beautiful. So thank you for that. So I'm in Detroit. Aretha is well known here. It's an understatement. I pass by the Motown Museum regularly, Hitsville. Irma sang Piece of My Heart before Janis. The Isley Brothers sang Twist and Shout before the Beatles. Did your dad ever, again, I feel bad asking these questions knowing that he died when you were so young, so these aren't conversations that you would have necessarily had with him, but is there any conversations where he said, I like the Isley Brothers version better, or in these sort of threading through multiple people playing songs, is there anything where him saying, I really like this version versus that version of a particular song?
Well, that's another great question that I don't think I've ever been asked. I know that he
Mission
said in an
accomplished.
interview. He said in an interview that a great song could be released again and again and again and recorded in different genres and different styles. And I think he proved that as well, with Twist and Shout originally was recorded by Phil Spector with a group called the Top Notes. And it's just an embarrassingly bad version of the song that never went anywhere. And is proof that even a great, producer like Phil Spector can screw up a song. And that was the moment my dad realized, okay, the producer is the one who makes sure that the song sounds like the songwriter wanted it to. And then he went in and recorded with the Isley Brothers. I don't know. Like, I would love to ask him that question. I know that he was thrilled beyond belief when the Beatles covered his song and he started seeing royalty checks that he had never seen before in his entire life. And then he goes to England to find out what's going on. And he was the first American record producer to go to England during the British invasion. So he spent a lot of time in the UK and worked with a lot of great British artists. But I don't know, like, if he ever really loved a version one more than the other. I wished he had lived to see some of his greatest songs being covered. Like, again, Piece of My Heart and Cry Baby would not be the iconic songs that we know them today if it wasn't for the great Janis Joplin. And the same can be said with songs of his like I Want Candy, which is just kind of a silly song, but it's a great song. It was Bow Wow Wow covered the Strangeloves version. The Strangeloves version is great, but Bow Wow Wow is the version that most people know today. You could say the same thing about Everybody Needs Somebody to Love, which he did originally with Solomon Burke and then Wilson Pickett. But then when the Blues Brothers, the Rolling Stones, and then the Blues Brothers covered it. And these are just examples again of like all of his greatest hits, were originally done by somebody else and were covers, the ones that we know today.
Incredible. I love how you said this quote from your dad that a great song can be recorded over and over in a different way. It reminded me of a conversation that I had with some friends of mine. And I'm a Deadhead. I'm wearing a Grateful Dead shirt, Fish It. And these are bands that played songs in different styles as the decades went on, right? So I don't know if you're a Deadhead or, listen to Fish or anything like that, but people can listen to a song and say, oh, this sounds like a fall 97 version, or this sounds like a late 70s, and people can get really specific on that. So I was talking to some friends who were talking about Bob Dylan, and my friend says, well, I like early Bob Dylan, but I really hate, I just can't listen to anything in his later years. I don't know why he does that. And, why he changed his sound so much. And I said, you guys are idiots. I said, what do you mean? And I said, we appreciate bands that change and evolve and grow as musicians, but you like 1967 or 1964 to 1977 Bob Dylan, and you don't want him to change in 45 years? Like, what are you talking about? He's changing and evolving and growing. And so the fact that you don't like that he's doing this weird cowboy, early 1900s radio thing right now, that's who he is as an artist today. And he's playing the same song that you love from a record that he recorded in 1968. And they were like, oh, well, when you put it that way, you're absolutely right. And I try to bring that lens to seeing artists. So I'm like, oh, I really like this version. No, I don't like this version. That doesn't make it a bad version. It just means that it doesn't tickle my fancy, on that version. But, that's okay. The artist wasn't playing for me, the artist was playing for them. And if we sync up properly, I like that version. And I like the way that you said that. You said it much more succinctly than I did. So forgive the long explanation of that.
Yeah, no, the Grateful Dead did two Burt Berns songs, and they're not real widely known, but I think they did Are You Lonely for Me, Baby? And maybe they did Everybody Needs Somebody to Love. And, I never had a chance to see the Dead. I went to see them once in Atlanta, Georgia, and I couldn't get a ticket to get into the show. But, and Bob Dylan, I have a little, I got to coach Bob Dylan's grandson in baseball in Malibu, and Bob would come to the games. And I never got a chance to ask him, because he would come in communicado wearing a hoodie and glasses, and you wouldn't even know he was there until he yelled at the umpire in his distinctive voice. But his son Jacob, he was a great talent as well. His son Judah was the best improved player on our championship team, and I always wanted to ask Bob if he ever crossed paths with my dad. I did hear one story. Gary Sherman, my dad's arranger orchestrator, said to me one day we were waiting for your dad, and he was never late for a session. Like, it was on time. And 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours go by, and Bert walks in, and he had just seen Bob Dylan play, and he said, "This kid's going to be a giant," something like that. I mean, I don't know. This is my only Bob Dylan story. That, and I got to teach Judah Dylan how to throw a baseball.
Spectacular. Well, Bob Dylan holds a special place in the storied community. We have as of today, when we're recording this, we've done 3 shows: one on the Beatles, one on grunge, and one on the Grateful Dead. In November, we're going to be doing the reggae era, or the reggae genre. And Bob Dylan is the only person or musician who's in all 4 shows. And so his fingerprint is uncalculable when it comes to the music scene. That's pretty amazing. So lots of people were mentioned in 1 or 2, but Bob is the only one that's in every episode. So let's bring it back to Jewish community and sort of the collaboration and contribution, because that's really what this show is about, is the Jewish communities or Jewish people's collaboration and contribution. What do you think your dad would be looking at today when it comes to Jewish community and how we are interacting with the world? I'm not talking about politics and the insanity. I'm talking about in music and in culture and in American pop culture. Like, he was such a big part of it 50, 60 years ago. What do you think he'd be doing today?
Another great question that don't think I've been asked. Wow. The only thing I can sort of be sure of is that he was just getting started in 1967. He had this 7-year run. He came out of Havana, where he was running guns for Castro right before the revolution, lands in New York, and starts this 7-year run where he became songwriter of standards, producer, consummate record producer, started his own record labels.
I'm going to interrupt you 1 second. If you heard what he just said, if you heard what Brett just said and go, what is he talking about? Go back to the Avram Rosenzweig podcast and listen to the whole story, because it's fascinating. All right, keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So he was, like I said, I think he was just getting started. I mean, if it wasn't for the bad heart, he was going to make movies. I mean, he was going to do everything. He was a guy who just wanted to experience everything he could. And I think the next band that he would have signed to Bang Records, if he had lived just a few more months, would have been a band called Led Zeppelin. And the reason for that is because Jimmy Page, like I said, was living in my apartment when I was a little baby and changing my diapers, because my father brought him to New York to work as a session musician at Atlantic Records, where he was the staff producer. And my father met Jimmy Page in London when he was doing those London sessions with Van Morrison and Lulu, and he was just a teenage kid. And my dad recognized a genius, and he on "Baby Please Don't Go" down in New Orleans, down, that's my dad's production. That's Jimmy Page playing guitar. Same on "Here Comes the Night." It's Jimmy Page, not the band, the guitar player for them. So right. He was just getting started. His label would have surpassed every Atlantic, all the greatest labels, because he was a magnet. The artist wanted to work with the guy like him. The relationship, Atlantic benefited from that, because they signed Led Zeppelin right after my dad died. They go in the studio, they record a song called Tribute to Burt Berns, which never got put on Led Zeppelin 1. And so what if my father had lived today, I think he would probably be as dismayed by how kind of messed up things are, not just as it is to be a Jew in this world, but also the state of the music business, right? I mean, like you said, artificial intelligence and social media. And I mean, there's no centralization any longer for music, so there's no quality control. I think he would look at the situation today and just think, my God, what happened to music? But I think he also would have found a way to adapt. And, I think, like I said, I think he would have probably been making movies. Now he would be maybe too old to do those things if he was alive today. But yeah, he would have continued to sign great artists and produce great music. And like I said, Led Zeppelin, no one can convince me that Led Zeppelin wouldn't have signed to Bang Records and not to Atlantic Records, because that's where the relationship was.
Right.
So yeah, I think he would have been maybe a little saddened by the state of music today. My three children are all brilliant musicians. They're songwriters. They're multi instrumentalists. I like to think that maybe he would have given them some encouragement and something, those kind of things. But like I said, just like it is for me, where his legacy looms so large and is a wellspring for us, for me and my siblings and my children as well. Wellspring of inspiration. In every kind of way.
Mm. What do you think is the most misunderstood or misrepresented part of your dad's legacy?
Easily the mafia part. And, it's maybe misrepresented. My dad was the most mobbed up man in the New York music business. There was no second place. Frank Sinatra, on that same kind of level. He was friends with the Genovese Godfather. He was friends with guys like Carmine de Noia, who's a star of my documentary. He was close friends with the Pagano family, who ran the Westchester mob. So there was, to some people, like, we say music meets the mob in the documentary tagline. So we wear it proudly, like my father's connections to that part of the world, which is also a Jewish Italian thing that goes way, way back to Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel and all kind of legendary Jewish gangsters who were connected to the Italians. But yeah, I think if you like, the one maybe most misunderstood thing was that he was somehow in business with them. And he wasn't. It was just, I know that sounds like I'm protesting too much and, don't take my word for it because I'm his son. But it was a relationship that was based on mutual friendship and love and respect. And these guys were attracted to him the way they were attracted to Frank Sinatra, because he was this larger than life rock star kind of guy. And he was comfortable around them because, again, he was the guy running around with the rebels in Cuba, and he knew he was living on borrowed time. So, he wasn't really playing by the rules. He never used his mafia connections to gain any advantage until somebody came after him to try to shake him down. And then they found out the very, very hard way that he was, again, there was no higher authority than his connections in the Genovese.
Right. Understood. What have I not talked about that you were hoping I would ask you?
Wow. I just love to talk about my father's Jewish soul, and especially in the world today where, Jews are under attack and anti-Semitism is out of control. And he was like one of those Jewish kids that, was colorblind, and there were no racial barriers in this recording studio. And when he had a session booked the next day, he would invite the acts up to his penthouse apartment, and they would have a cookout, and they'd have drinks, and they'd stay up until late in the night listening to records. And he was just such a human being. Like I think of him as like a tzedek, like a just man. And you look at the whole story and you see how he wasn't afraid to take baseball bats and smash up bootleggers. That's part of it, but he really was a just man who treated people fairly, treated the artists that he worked with fairly. And I just love talking about his Jewish soul, and I think that was an important thing to him. So we did talk about that. So you actually did ask about that. And, I'm just hoping to share this story with the world. We did a lot of work before the pandemic with the book, the documentary, and the musical was off Broadway. And now we're going to really try to bring this story to the larger audience through big media projects like Broadway musical that's going to go to the London West End as well. And we're also been working on a movie with the legendary Rob Reiner. another great Jewish
Amazing.
artist, who is telling my dad's story in sort of in a feature film that's very, very different from the musical or the documentary or anything else that we've done. So yeah, my goal is to, like my sister says, blow the dandelion, like having this great conversation with you, talking about Burt Berns. And we hope to, that he becomes kind of like a household name, like a Phil Spector or a Lieber and Stoller. He came from that same place. He stands shoulder to shoulder with Holland Dozier Holland, the great Detroit Motown writers, and Lieber and Stoller, who are the kings of songwriter producers. Burt Berns really is as great as those guys. And so, yeah, that's my goal, is to sort of get him known. I don't think that was his goal necessarily, but it certainly is mine. And so I just want to thank you for, helping me to spread the good word.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I told you I feel a kindred spirit with you, having this legacy of my dad and your dad, and just, putting that out there, and letting the world see what that was really like. So it's a beautiful thing. I've got two questions that are sort of my wrap-up questions, and this really comes from sort of the ethos of what Storied is. And we're trying to find exploring the Jewish collaboration and contribution. But, in today's world, we've mentioned it a couple of times, Jewish life can be hard. I tell people, you go to Jewish events and they require a box of tissues and a therapy appointment afterwards. And so part of the purpose of Storied is really to find that Jewish joy in the place where people can love being Jewish and just love the community, and be proud of themselves, right? Be able to wear the necklace out as opposed to tuck it into their shirt or take it off completely. Can you talk about Jewish joy in your life, and maybe even, is there Jewish joy that your father passed down? Are there recipes or traditions or stories that are sort of your family stuff? That's the good stuff of Jewish joy. And the second part of the question is, well, answer that, and then I'll get to the second part of the question.
Yeah, it really is Zionism. I mean, like, Zionism is our Jewish identity. I was not raised religious, a very secular upbringing with my mother. She kept my father's spirit alive by telling us stories about him, like that he was this Zionist that wanted to fight in the 6-Day War and those kind of things. But yeah, the one thing, my big takeaway, was his love for Israel. And, he knew and believed that Israel was essential to, the safety and the longevity of the Jewish people. And so being raised with that kind of strong Zionist ideal, was, I think, if he was here, that would be the thing that he would still be trying to promote. And I've tried to do the same with my own children. And yeah, so we really are like a Zionist family. I know that almost sounds like, you can't say that anymore. Like, Zionism is the most wonderful thing, liberation movement where people actually go back and live in their historic homeland. I mean, like, how can you not love that? I guess if you're Palestinian, it's the one, but we've tried to live in peace with them. We're still trying to. It just seems to be an impossible thing. Sorry to get political, but yeah, I think it's that's where that's my family Jewish identity really is connected to Israel, and I think that's because of my dad. And if he was alive today, I think we might even be living in Israel, and I intend to live in Israel again. After the musical goes to Broadway, I'm going to go and live on a moshav and grow bananas until I can't do it any longer.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. It's a simple answer. Some people talk about the Kiddush cup that their dad had, or the specific song, and your connection to Israel is a beautiful thing. And I love that answer. And Zionism being a bad word is a misrepresentation and a misunderstanding. I don't think that that's a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. So I love that answer.
Awesome.
And then the last question is getting back to the collaboration and contribution. So in today's world, what do you see as the Jewish contribution, or an important, because there's hundreds of them, if not thousands of them. But where do you see today Jewish collaboration, a Jewish contribution that you're going, I'm glad that that's happening, because that's a poignant thing in today's art music culture?
My dad's example of collaboration, like when I always think like, he was this heroic example of courage, perseverance, integration, and collaboration was the key. Like he made people feel like they were really contributing, to the work of art that they were creating. And he didn't just treat people like just another songwriter or another singer or another musician. Like he treated them with the respect that he would have wanted if he was just doing one thing or another. So the collaboration in my own life, where I collaborate with people, that's like I just follow my father's example. Like he's Sissy Houston, the great singer from the Sweet Inspirations, Whitney Houston's mother. She said, "Oh, Bert would just come and say, Sissy, just sprinkle a little something on there," which meant like just come up with the background vocal arrangements on the spot, which she did, and probably should have been credited for, better. But that kind of collaborative spirit for me is very inspirational. And I try to do that in my own life and work. My co-director on the documentary, Bob Sarles, he came in originally just as an editor, but his work was so transformative on the film that, I wanted that he should have been director, and he became co-director with me. On the musical, there's nothing more collaborative than a Broadway musical. I mean, it's the queen of the arts, because everything has to work in perfect synchronicity. The music, the staging, the acting, the choreography, the arrangements, the orchestrations, all of it. And I've had the blessing to work with some of the most brilliant people in the American theater. And again, it's a mix of everything. My playwright, Daniel Goldfarb, brings the Jewish sensibility. My, director, choreographer, Dennis Jones, who's not Jewish, but, again, it's just a great collaborative space. And I've been able to see firsthand, how something like my father's music might have been made in that same collaborative place. And today, while Jewish themed projects are being canceled across all media, and it's a 5-alarm fire in book publishing, in Hollywood. Look at the music business. I think theater is maybe the one art form that hasn't been affected by this, and it's very Jewish art form. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but in terms of collaboration, my father's example again is the inspiration for me, and I try to, just walk even a half a mile in his footsteps. I feel like I've done something meaningful.
Well, I love that answer, and I from what I can tell, you're doing your dad proud, and I hope I get to carry my dad's legacy as well as you're carrying your dad's. It's really a wonderful thing.
You are, Benji. You are, and thank you for doing this. This is God's work. Thank you for doing this.
Where can people find you? Where can people find information about you and the projects?
Yeah, we have a burtberns.com website, which there's Bang the Burt Berns story. The documentary is on Amazon and some other on-demand sites. And Piece of My Heart, the musical, which, like I said, we're right now trying to figure out after the pandemic the best way forward for the project. It's like most people have one musical, or have a career, and they do many different projects. For me, it's just one time, bring this musical to the world. So when that happens, that's I hope you'll join me on opening night on Broadway. Come in from Detroit for that. There's a very big development that's about to happen in the Burt Berns legacy next month that is confidential, actually, still, and so I can't even talk about it. But it's enormous moment of recognition for my father that in about a month's time we'll be able to publicize.
Well, this episode is going to come out at the end of September, so maybe you want to share now, and I'll be sworn to secrecy until the announcement. No pressure.
Okay. Well, he's being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame on September 9th at a private event in New York City. And, the Songwriters Hall of Fame, when I got started with this whole project of Burt Berns, my goal was to get him in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, because I thought that's a realistic expectation. Whereas the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was very, very impossible. The guy who founded the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was Ahmet Ertegun, the founder of Atlantic Records. And when you look at the Burt Berns story, you see why my dad was being blackballed from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But he's finally getting into the Songwriters Hall of Fame at a private event in New York. And that is really the fulfillment of my life's work. When I got started and I was like, how are we going to get him in the Songwriters Hall of Fame? In the end, we said we'll have to do it by telling his story in every media, and we did that. And then he got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ahead of the Song Hall. But this is an extraordinary honor for him, and one that I really wanted more than anything else. And so when this broadcasts in late September, we will have already inducted him into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. So congratulations, Dad, you made it.
Congratulations, Brett, and to Bert. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right. I really appreciate you being here, Brett. This was really special, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. I can't wait for the Broadway show to come out, and I'm looking forward to hearing people's reaction to diving into this story of your dad and his contribution to the Beatles and Twist and Shout and the iconology of that. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Benji.
That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps the algorithm show other people this podcast. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, again, reach out. We would love to talk to you. And make sure you check out the show notes for the links to our socials and our sponsors. This show was produced by Ryan Storm from This Is Storm Sound. Editing done by Andrea Rizzuto. Production management done by Eric Nelson. Booking by Leanne Deutsch of 16 Mile Talent. Design work done by Tessa Hewitt. Research done by Avishai Bauman. Now, the music you heard is recorded by Evan Sherman, but was actually written by my late father, Rabbi Yossel Rosenzweig, as the original opening of the song that he wrote for the Diaspora Yeshiva band called Pit Huli. I'm your host and storyteller, Benji Rosenzweig, and this has been another episode of Storied, the untold Jewish stories behind your favorite music, Season 1, The Beatles.